This week, we're exploring the future of work, particularly the social and cultural trends surrounding this area. Our guest this week is Hamet Watt, co founder and chairman of Instill, and CEO and managing partner of Share Ventures. Welcome to the AI+HI project, Hamet.
Thank you for having me, Nicole. Great to see you as always.
When I wanted to explore the topic of culture and AI, you were one of the very first people that I thought of because I remembered our conversation about the company that you were building with Dan, Instill. Could you let us know or tell us about what inspired you to work at the intersection of cultural measurement and AI?
Yeah, we didn't start off thinking we were going to build a company. It was when I was starting Share and thinking about Share as a venture studio and a fund. And I really committed to myself that I was going to commit to making sure that every company that we started out of our lab or funded had a world-class culture. And I felt like going through the process, we wanted to have some really great tools. So we hired a bunch of organizational psychologists and spent time with neuroscientists, really trying to study the science of teams and team formation. We were just doing it because we're about to start a bunch of new companies. And as we started to pull all this information together and codify it and experiment with AI in terms of ways of standardizing measurement, we started showing this to founders and we realized they all wanted it. They all needed it. They were using very antiquated technologies to measure their cultures, to establish and document their values and cultures, and building the foundations on which they're going to build the company. And so we realized that the codification of culture measurement, management, and optimization in and of itself represented a humongous market opportunity that's largely underserved. And so we fell into it, to be quite honest. We were building it for our own needs and realized that we weren't the only ones that needed to really invest technology into something that's so foundational.
One of the things about culture is that when it's right, it really supports your strategy so much. And when
Yes.
it's wrong, nothing works. And so, but historically, it's been, as you said, really hard to capture. It's like grabbing smoke. And so I was really intrigued by just this idea of cultural measurement. And one of the things that we talked about was that a term you shared with me, cultural operating system. What is that, and why is that crucial for an organization, especially one that's dealing and existing in this age of AI? Why is a cultural operating system important?
Yeah, we think a culture operating system is critical, just like any kind of operating system is critical. And we think about what Salesforce has done in the sales world in terms of creating a system of record and an operating system of sorts for managing sales, or what HubSpot has done in marketing. And when you think about culture, your point is exactly right. It feels ethereal. It feels like it's too much unstructured data. Well, guess what? AI is beautiful at taking this unstructured data and helping us standardize it. And so when you think about the foundation for a company, we think about an operating system for culture that allows someone to think about their culture in the same way they would think about other functions of their business. Meaning when they're reporting to their board, they now have a slide when someone says, "Hey, how's the team doing?" You know, you can give a much more nuanced and much more quantitatively articulate answer to that question, because we have a dashboard that allows you to see all of the various elements of your culture, allows you to understand the entire workflow that you need to build in order to give yourself the best chance of having the best culture. We realized in talking to a lot of companies that had great cultures, they're very intentional about that, right? Everyone has a culture. Whether or not you're intentional about it, that's a whole other question. And so we really endeavored to study those that did it really well, those that measured it well, those that served it well, those that invested in it more broadly. And our goal with the operating system is to democratize what it takes to be a world-class company from a culture standpoint.
How have you seen this age of AI changing how companies are thinking about organizational culture and measuring it? Like what's different now versus before?
Yeah. Well, I'd say, the state of the art for understanding how your teams are doing have been surveys. And we've all been through and taken those surveys, and there's really such a thing as survey fatigue. And so
Hmm.
figuring out more passive ways to get that insight on how people are doing, how people are connecting. Do they have psychological safety? Do they trust one another? Do they understand the values of the company? Do they have an alignment with the overall mission of the company? AI is fantastic for that. And so we built a lot of tools that aggregate all into one, some of these elements that mitigate survey fatigue and that just transition us into a whole new way of thinking about it. Something that you and I have talked about before, and I don't want to jump the gun on your questions, but the other part of this is having the right culture for innovation and to accept AI into our workplace. It's so amazing what's happening and scary at the same time. But it's absolutely the case that only certain cultures are really set up to really embrace all of this change and turn it into something that's going to be really net positive for their business. And so that's another, it's kind of paradoxical in some way. We're using AI to better understand cultures and to help organizations better understand cultures. But now more than ever, it's critical that those cultures are going to be positioned well to leverage all of the shifts that are happening as a result of AI.
Yeah, one of the things we're doing is really looking into and studying the determinants of success and the
Mm.
determinants of failure around AI implementations. And plenty of studies, like Rand Corporation just came out with a study. And, the stats are different depending on who you're looking at. But, even going from predictive and machine learning implementations to generative AI implementations, these implementations are failing 80% of the time.
Mhm.
And for the companies that succeed, it's the ones that realize that it's a human behavioral, social, cultural change. And so I think, you know, we're entering a place where in order to onboard the technology, you have to have a culture that is compatible with it. So sort of like an AI compatible culture, which I think probably is the old innovation culture, but I think it's even more dynamic than that. It's a dynamic growth culture. And I think a lot of times senior executives, they think they have one culture because they spend most of their time talking to their seniors, and they often don't really know deep down in the organization what's happening. And so they might think they have a different culture than they do. And what I love about, this ability to, really capture what's going on through the unstructured data of AI, you can like actually know what your culture is. So, what I'd love to hear is, do you have a case, an example that you can share with us of an organization that has successfully reshaped their culture to, you know, better enter markets or better integrate AI while still being, really mindful about their culture?
Yeah, I want to think a little bit more about that, and maybe I can give a kind of a more typical scenario without naming names. But I think what we've seen a lot from we sell a lot into founders and CEOs. It's not just chief people officers, and I think what gives me the most fulfillment when I'm talking to a founder is to see those pupils dilate, to kind of feel like we've answered some of the things that almost every one of our customers like, I've been thinking about this way. We needed something that can turn the magic of what we're doing in terms of building our culture into something that's scalable and repeatable. So I'd say the archetype for us is a founder that has gone through perhaps a Series A financing, and maybe they're now getting ready to do a Series B, but they're getting to that point where they're about to inflect in terms of the growth of the business overall, and then the number of hires. And then a little thing, it's kind of like the emotion does a bit of it goes up because now the founder has been able to achieve this great milestone and been able to raise all this capital, and they realize they have to grow significantly, and then they start getting nervous at the same time, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to triple the size of my team. And what made me special up to that point was that this team and this culture that I built is so very special. And so when they are faced with the reality that they're not going to know everyone, and we all know about the Dunbar number, we've spent a lot of time with, the anthropologists as it relates to thinking about groups and cultures. But after you get past that 150 number, the game changes a bit in terms of how you know the company and therefore how you shape it. So our platform has contemplated that a bit, and it's about making sure that the fidelity of the culture and what the team has been able to implement when they were small can be the same when they're large. And so being able to capture and have a system of record for all of those values, have a consistent way to onboard new employees so that they truly understand the mission of the company and those values and can embody and defend those values. When you think about that in a scalable way, you need software, you need technology, you need AI. And that's where we get most excited. So those founders that are about to inflect, that are saying, I now have confidence to think about my growth because I've attributed a lot of my success to the strength of my culture. And now I'm not worried that the scaling of that is going to be faced with challenge because there now is a system that helps.
Well, it's one of those things I say that, there's a saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think also culture eats AI strategy for breakfast too. Like any strategy, it really comes down to the culture. And so I'm curious about disconnects. I mentioned them a little bit earlier. Oh, I want to circle back on something. Everybody, the Dunbar number is this concept that 150 people is the maximum number of close connections that a very outgoing human being can have. So, what Hamet is referencing is that as a company is growing, and they get beyond the size where you have that natural flow and tie for connection, that it gets to a point where there's more processes and more layers. And many founders and in growth companies, that's, as Hame said, that's when they start to worry because they realize they don't know everybody's name. They don't know how many kids everybody has. They don't know where everyone is in their development after that point, and so that's when they get worried. Okay, so going back, Hame, I'd love to hear a little bit about, you know, for culture, what have you kind of seen when you've seen disconnects between executive perceptions and employee experiences? Because we've talked about companies that are growing, so they have a great culture and they want to preserve it. What about when you have a questionable culture and you want to change it? What do you do?
That is a really great question, and I think we try to be as positive as we can as we think about and we talk to the marketplace. But the reality, the cost of a bad culture is almost immeasurable. And it is certainly one could easily say the cost of a bad culture and the downside associated with a bad culture is even greater than the upside of a good culture. I'm not so sure how I'd measure that, but um, we definitely look at some interesting cases. You guys may remember the Delete Uber campaign. I think this is obviously way before our time, but I think it's a great exemplar. Uber and Lyft are going, head to head against one another, but Uber is certainly in the lead position. And the timing of a financing was really important. I think Lyft was trying to get a fairly large, almost save the company financing done. And again, Uber was definitely inflecting and growing faster than Lyft. So it was questionable as to whether that was going to actually get done. And then the Delete Uber campaign happened, which was Uber's, I'm sure, since then cleaned up its culture quite a bit, but it was very challenged with its culture at that time and was facing a lot of press issues and things that were causing them to come into question. And Uber coming into question at that time, where Lyft was having to raise the capital, was what allowed Lyft to raise that capital. Who knows? Maybe Lyft might not even be here had that not happened. And Uber would have one less significant competitor and maybe $20 billion of valuation that could have changed. So, there's so many examples of those where a challenged culture, costs real money and real value. And so I think I would amplify that in today's environment. The cost of not having a innovation centric culture that is responsive and receptive to all of these shifts that are happening because of AI is huge. We've heard that all companies now need effectively be innovation companies. All companies need to be a bit of content companies. And so when you think about that, um, all of these legacy companies are going to need to shift. And that means their culture not only has to be good in terms of being an enriching place and a nourishing place for their team, but it has to be optimized to really integrate AI into its workflow and process. Otherwise, their competitors will and they'll lose.
One of the things that I find so fascinating about the ability for AI to, or generative AI to sort the unstructured data to actually be able to give a real read on the culture is that, this is an innovation that, you know, 7 years ago, this type of measurement would have been impossible. It would have been so, the brute force required to make it work would have been really terrible, which is why so many people were, settling on the pulse surveys, and I'll tell you what, I can go to the best restaurant in the world and I won't write a Yelp. Like, so, no one's doing the longer surveys, or if they do it, it's not it's a, I don't think it's a really accurate snapshot, but this sort of passive capture of a culture is fascinating, and I think so much more useful for executives, especially when the company will have an agent where, the CEO could walk in and say to the company's agent, "Hey agent, how is my culture today? Like, what's happening?" I think that's fascinating, but it does raise, like, what are the ethical considerations, that organizations should be aware of when they're using technology, any technology, to measure and influence culture? Like, how should we think about ethics with this?
It's a great question. And when we first started, we had all of these really fancy technologies that helped us use passive data, collecting data from Slack and all sorts of other company communications to be able to do analysis with our AI models and present something back that's very easy and digestible for the users. But what we were saying is, essentially what we're building is the world's best chief culture officer that's in every small meeting, that's in every large meeting, that has the right kind of empathy and can hear all that and ingest that and digest it in a way that can be articulated to leaders and rank and file employees, individual contributors, in a way that can be very helpful. Our initial response with the passive collection was fairly negative. We were fairly early in that process, but it's amazing to see. Well, one of our first partners was the Army, right? They have extreme sensitivity to data and privacy and all that stuff, and so we, of course, built enough infrastructure to make sure we could give people, beyond a shadow of a doubt, complete comfort that there is the utmost security of that data. And then I think a big part of it comes back to the relationship that the company has with their employees and that underlying trust that they have. And, the ethos behind what we're doing is all about how to improve the employee experience. We know that employees' sense of well-being, I think you may have even given me some of these stats, Nicole, is tied very directly to the relationships that they have, principally with their manager, but also with the rest of their colleagues. It can be a bigger predictor of their overall well-being than just about anything else. So we think our mission is very, very clear around that. Um, we are trying to be neutral, though, as we provide the tools to various employers, so that they can use it to serve their own purposes. But in all cases, right now, we feel like people are doing it very responsibly. Of course, our platform allows for the ingestion of data through more traditional surveys as well, right? So we're not ignoring those systems. But at the end of the day, we're saying if everyone could have a PhD level chief culture officer in their office that understood their mission, their vision, their values, could provide a very good interface, very compelling, easy interface for managers, and a very compelling, easy interface for individual contributors to all optimize towards building the best culture that you possibly can in the company. Then that's our mission. And I make that distinction about individual contributors as well, because we don't think it's about just the leaders. It's not just the leaders' job to establish a great culture. It's everyone's job to do that. And as a platform, being able to make sure that that is embedded in it so that every user coming into it understands that they're not just leaning back and saying, hey, how's my company's culture? No, they're contributing to that culture. They're enforcing that culture. They're living behind those values. And that becomes something that everyone can get excited about.
Yeah. That's the, the what's in it for me, and AI that's done not to people, but with people. I think that's really important. Though I want to circle back on something. I was just reading a study that was in HBR, Harvard Business Review, and they looked at the ability of AI to make strategic decisions in the role of a CEO. And
Oh,
they
wow.
looked at 344 companies in the automotive industry around the world. And what happened was really interesting. The AIs made good decisions, CEO level decisions for the known, but they failed miserably on black swan events. Just failed miserably on black swan events.
Meaning
And
when the Black Swan event took place, they didn't know what to do, or in anticipating.
yeah. Well, because AIs are built on data, it's historical. And the LLMs are predicting, but they're predicting the next, token based on historical data.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if, really it's a situation where there is a chief culture officer. Like that's a human role because, also in this VUCA, VUCA, volatile, uncertain, competitive, always changing environment, there's going to be black swans every day. Oh, by the way, everybody, a black swan is an event that you just could not have predicted. It's that employee, sending a deep fake of their manager,
Oh,
in the
could you
middle of the
imagine?
night. Yeah.
That could happen.
Or it's yeah, or, it's just it's Uber not expecting Lyft to get their funding. Like, black swan events happen nonstop. And so, how do you think about this technology or culture measurement technologies as a companion to a
Yeah.
chief culture officer who is also recruiting the audience or recruiting the organization to be, um, cultural participants? Like, how do these two things go together?
Yeah.
Because we can't be vulnerable to the black swans, and human judgment is really needed for that.
Yeah. Human judgment is absolutely needed. We're just trying to turn the chief culture officer or the CEO, whoever is the primary instigator for culture, and give them superpowers. Give them the ability to pay attention to that, small rank and file employee that is potentially an extraordinary contributor, but may be overlooked and may not be managed appropriately because of the culture or the lack of receptivity to that persona. I'm just using that as an example, but yeah, we think it's something that takes a really strong leader, and we're very fortunate that our early customers are really strong leaders, whether they're chief people officers or founders or CEOs. They're adopting Instill because they really believe that culture is an X factor that will result in value, performance, outcomes that are commonly understood and accepted and excited, that people are excited about. That could be impact, that could be value creation, that could be others. So I think it really is, it takes a human to say to begin with, hey, I want to invest, I want to use technology to better my culture, right? That takes a certain type of person. And then yeah, they're very much in the loop. It's interesting your point around black swan events, because could probably make a case that humans aren't really great at navigating black swan events either. And so I do think the 1+1 = 3 in that case. So it probably will improve outcomes overall. And I'd say this with respect to culture, but it could be in other verticals as well. When a human or a collection of humans, to use your collective intelligence framework, in conjunction with AI, are navigating a black swan event, they're going to be more likely to succeed in that than a solo human or a collection of humans or a solo AI. And so I think that's a really important point, and I think again reflective of how people need to think about AI in this day and age, to prepare themselves and give themselves superpowers to navigate things that are going to be hard.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna zoom out a little bit and just on the future of work and culture. How do
Yeah.
you envision that the future of work writ large is going to change as AI is getting more prevalent, and what cultural shifts are organizations going to need to prepare for?
Yeah. I think one of the things that we see in organizations more broadly, and as you know, we did a study collaboration with some folks from Stanford and Caltech. It's called the nature and nurture of exceptional teams and cultures. And what we looked at in this first phase of the study, and we're doing a second phase, which I can share with you and many others that might be in this ecosystem, is we really wanted to understand what are the unique components and elements of team composition, in conjunction with the environments, physical environments or cultural environments that allow them to be exceptional. And exceptional is top decile or above. And we looked at both teams and culture. So, what are the attributes of those teams and what are the attributes of those cultures? And one of the things, many of these things are quite intuitive and or had been studied before. If you remember, there was a study a while ago. A lot of that study inspired what we're doing, done by Google. It's called Project Aristotle, and this is
Mm.
a study that popularized psychological safety as a key predictor of outcomes. So both psychological safety and trust as foundational elements to a team and culture are mission critical in this environment today, where someone is saying, oh my God, this AI can do everything I do. Holy crap. I'm threatened. I'm not safe. I'm not sure I can trust my team if an AI can do exactly what I do, maybe better, maybe faster, probably cheaper. So, how does the environment and how does the culture of trust and psychological safety support people to say, oh, no, this tool is phenomenal. Let me figure out how I can use this as superpowers to create more value, more growth, more success, more impact, more outcomes. And so I think that's a fundamental piece of what is critical in being receptive to these new technologies.
Yeah, the two data points before we finish up. One, I've really been digging deep into Microsoft's HR AI internal implementation because
Mhm.
I think they just really understood some foundational pieces.
Mm.
So there's three pillars to what they do. One is robust experimentation, and then the second part is the employee participation in reshaping the business architecture. So what
Mhm.
they did is they said at a high level, these are the areas that we want you to explore in. And what happened is, when the people started automating some of their workload, you know, when it comes to trust, like leaders or employees watch their leaders, but they also watch what their leaders do to their peers. And
Mhm.
so what happened is that the people who were the champions, who were some of the first to automate their workflows, parts of their work, getting rid of those tasks, they saw that the leadership response to that freedom was to give them things that were on their wish list, things that they really wanted to do. So that created
Mm.
side by side trust. And then what happened was that those employees, especially as more and more of them piled on to this process, they started advancing and shaping and innovating in the business architecture in ways that the leadership, you know, did not dictate and had not necessarily known because it was the people doing the work who are actually saying, "Oh, no, we could do this, and we could do this, and we could do this." And that's the step that needs to happen. And actually, it was only after that that they decided hero cases that then they would put co-pilots on top of. So it's sort of like it's really interesting. And so that's one part about sort of what it looks like and how you can get this added business impact. that people, I don't think, have factored in yet. How the people
Yeah.
will actually, make your business sing,
That's
when you say
brilliant.
it
That's brilliant.
properly.
So let me make sure I'm understanding, because you're saying that Microsoft, instead of just saying, "Hey, we're re-architecting the way that the teams work," they're actually just empowering the employees to say, how do you re-architect your job so that you can do more of the things that you have on your wish list than the things that might be, and just that slight repositioning empowered the teams to embrace it more than be concerned around it.
Yes, and I mean, they did give high level guidance of these are the areas
Yeah,
that, we want you to plant seeds in.
that's brilliant.
So,
Yeah,
some of the mistakes that companies are making is that they are experimenting, and that's a good thing, but it's willy-nilly and it's like a field of dandelions, like, it's, like, everywhere, and
yeah,
it's not driving the business forward. So, leadership has to say, "Okay, we wanna do it in these areas. We think these will have the biggest yield," but they don't say how and they don't say what, and they let the people experiment within that, and then you have the people who are actually close to the work, doing the work, do it. But the trust thing that you talked about, there's that side by side trust when I see how you, as the leader, respond to freedom.
yeah,
What do you do with it? And then the second thing that's interesting is MIT and BCG did a study in 2021 where they showed a positive impact on culture of successful AI implementations, and they're about to come out with the update of that in November, specifically around generative AI. So I think
great.
what we're seeing is that like culture is leverage for successful AI implementation, but you can't leverage it if you don't know what it is
Yeah,
and you're not measuring it. And
that's
so
right.
that's where I think, the types of or the type of technology that you've developed comes into play.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have one more question,
Okay.
and that is on the final advice. What advice would you give an HR business leaders who are just starting to think about measuring their culture? What should they do? How should they think about it? Of course they should, look into what you're doing, but other than that,
Yeah.
what should they do?
Yeah. Well, I do think it really is about the pairing of the measurement with the execution and the operationalization. We all know organizations that have these great measurement efforts, and they don't talk to the execution side. And so you might have these insights that don't translate into action and change. And so I think certainly we've paired those two worlds, but I think in general, the mindset should be, yes, we need to, of course, measure our culture, but we need to think about how we close that loop, how we get that measurement into implementation as efficiently and quickly as possible, so that the action plan and the workflow for building a world-class culture is also very clearly understood. And the process is something that they can really embrace. So I think that's a critical part. I would say the other part is understanding that technology plays a very important role into up leveling the culture. And I think that's sometimes misunderstood, because mo- I'm old enough to remember that once upon a time there were folks that were hating on Salesforce. I remember it very clearly. They're like, "Oh, great sales is not about software and technology. Great sales is about relationships and trust and meals that we're sharing." And and guess what? Of course it is. Of course it's about those things. But it so happens that a system of record and some technology that increases the efficiency for the workflow and the execution creates enormous amounts of value. So it's the same thing in culture. Great culture is about connecting physically in person with people, understanding what their kids' names are, sharing meals together, being able to do experiences together to build that trust and to do things that help them learn. But when you're thinking about scale and when you're thinking about accuracy, when you're thinking about that person that might be overlooked, technology is a beautiful tool to embrace. So whether it's our platform or just applying technology in general to solve this problem, I think that's another critical part of how leaders, HR leaders, and company leaders can think about this. The last point I'll make is everyone has a culture, right? We know this. Everyone has a culture. We think of it this: the culture that you have is the culture that you think you have. It's the culture that you want, And then it's probably the culture that you need to achieve the outcome goal that you want. And they may not be the same. In most cases, they're not the same. And so our goal is to provide some infrastructure and technology that makes it so that you have the culture that you need. And it also feels like the culture that you want.
That's great, and that's a fantastic place to close. Thank you so much, Hame. Everyone,
Oh,
that's going to do it for this week's episode. A big thank you to our guests for sharing your experiences and deep insights with us. Before we say goodbye, I encourage you to follow the AI+HI project wherever you enjoy your podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to comment, leave a review, and finally, you can find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/AI+HI. Thanks for the conversation, and we'll catch you next time.